Self-confidence sounds like a good thing. We'd all love to have it. Could you maybe share some research that reveals how more self-confidence can really translate into actual results for professionals, particularly if you got those examples, as opposed to just feeling good?
Absolutely.
I mean, it'd be nice to feel confident, but what does that mean in terms of results and victory?
Well, I think the first thing you have to recognize is let's start with the definition of self-confidence. So everybody's playing and starting at the same place. And so the definition I use in the research is this genuine belief in your ability to accomplish the task at hand. Self-confidence, right? And I want everybody to know it's not this magic pill that you just take and you can swallow and you can just, I'm all of a sudden self-confident. But, the research that started looking at this goes way back to some foundational work that talked about optimism and happiness. But the big one that I started that got me in this venue was looking and reading about Angela Duckworth and grit. And she was studying grit, which is the belief in your ability to accomplish tasks despite setbacks. And she was looking at how people, what they told themselves, how they believed in themselves, how that really influenced their ability to move forward. And she studied a bunch of military personnel. It was Beast Barracks Week during West Point Military Academy. And, the military academy, they're really interested in how do people decide that we should make it through candidate training school, because it's hell. They don't get to sleep. They don't get to eat. There's noise pollution, all these things, because they're testing those candidates to make them ready. And so they did an aptitude test. They did physical testing. They did all these leadership scores. They did a battery of tests. And when they looked at these tests, they were somewhat predictive of who would be successful. But when Angela Duckworth came with these 13 items to predict grit and resilience, she found those 13 items more reliable than those hundreds of questions combined. And then when I read that, I'm like, whoa, grit is a reliable predictor of performance and your ability to succeed. And when I started really looking into grit, I studied just the first half of it, which was this genuine belief in your ability to accomplish the task at hand. And then there was further research that went into how affirmations played a role in that, how self-talk, which is another word for self-talk, how focus played a role in that, how repetition played a role in that. The research is out there and it's all saying the same thing. That you can't start with talent. You have to start with this belief in your ability, and only then will the talent get a moment to shine.
When you talk about a given task at hand in terms of self-confidence, then I imagine you may very well have self-confidence in one domain and not at all in another, because those are very different tasks, and some you think you've got totally covered, and others you feel woefully unprepared for. Is that accurate?
This is really accurate. Your concept about, is it global? I want you to think about the first time you have your first job, right? You've got it. You've mastered that skill. And all of a sudden your boss comes in and says, here's your promotion and you're ready to roll. And imagine the doubt and the fear. We all hear about it. Imposter syndrome that now starts to creep in. You were master of your domain. You had it taken care of. You were the queen of your ship or the king of your castle, whatever it is, the term you want to use. And all of a sudden now you've got to manage people or you've got to lead this presentation. And because these tasks are typically novel to you and you haven't had the affirmations and the feedback that says you've got this, to coin a phrase from the book, then that whole self-spiraling doubt and negativity starts to spiral into you, which affects your performance.
Certainly. Well, so then if we find ourselves in a space where we're not so self-confident and we would like to be, what do we do?
It's a great question. And when I give a speech about this topic, I say it's not like you're at the Las Vegas and Celine Dion is on stage and I'm Canadian, so I'm going to pick Celine Dion and she gets food poisoning and all of a sudden the manager comes in and says, ladies and gentlemen, we can no longer close out the show. Celine Dion can't sing her amazing closing song because she's sick. And you stand up, Pete, and you say, yeah, I got this. I've watched Titanic 100 times. That's not really confidence. That's somewhere on the edge of delusional, I'll say. When I talk about confidence, the task can't be novel to you. So there's a series of steps to really move towards confidence. And the first one is repetition, repetition, repetition. Gladwell talks about it as a 10,000 hour rule. Whatever it is for you to have confidence and genuine belief in your ability. So I want you to think about it for some folks and some listeners out there about the first time you drove stick shift. Do you drive stick, Pete?
I tried a couple times and then I stopped. It didn't go very well.
The first time you drive stick on a hill with a car behind you, oh my God, your heart is racing 100 miles an hour. By the time you've driven stick for a year later, a year and a half later, whatever it is, that skill is so automatic. And so number one thing is like find a way to get to your practice, to your repetition. And if you're a leader and you're getting ready to present in front of the mirror, present in front of your partner, present in front of a small group of friends, get the feedback. So by the time you've got onto that big stage, you're no longer scared. So that would be the first step. The next thing to do is to really control that negative tape that plays in your head. You know that tape. I wish I was this. I hate myself in this. Look, I can't do this job. As a sports psychologist and a performance enhancement consultant, I work with a lot of athletes. I've been lucky enough to work with Olympians and NBA athletes and the national team of basketball for Canada. And we do a lot of what we call centering or thought stopping. Next time you're watching a professional athlete, watch the different physical cues that they'll use: pointing, clapping, finger snapping. Whenever they make a mistake, they don't dwell on the mistake. The phrase we use is live in the moment or be in the presence, right? And what that is about being in the moment, meaning forget about the mistake. Stop that negative talk, whatever that negative doubt is. Use a physical cue to bring you to the present and replace it with a positive talk, whatever that might be. You got this. I got the next one. I'm ready. The power of affirmations is really critical.
That's intriguing. So are you telling us that frequently when we observe such physical snaps, claps, etc. from athletes, this is exactly what they're doing?
Oh, 100%. I guarantee it. I remember one time, the first time I noticed it many years ago into my dissertation, there was a famous soccer player by the name of Thierry Henry. And this is a guy making millions of pounds a year. And he missed a wide open goal, right? And all he did was point back to the person that passed him the ball and said, nice job. I got the next one. And you could read it on his lips and see it on TV. You don't get to be excellent by focusing on all the mistakes and all the inadequacies that you have.
Okay, excellent. Well, so then I like that notion of the physical gesture to kind of just make it really clear, hey, we're stopping that now and we're transitioning to something else. So snaps, claps. What are some other good ones?
You'll see some athletes that will take a little rubber band and move it from one wrist to the other. Sometimes they'll snap it. You'll see some folks that will jingle some coins. Watch the next time you'll see an athlete just take a deep breath in, and that reminds them, okay, I got this. I remember the very first time I was doing a big speech. Now I'd spoken before, but you get paid in a bottle of wine or like a coffee mug. But the very first time I was on stage and I was 4,000 people. And the night before Maya Angelou was on stage and we were like, this was the big deal. I was about to be big time. At least as big as C-level celebrities are, or maybe E or G or whatever the number is. But I was so nervous. Behind the stage, I had to clap, clap, clap. You got this, you got this, you got this. I had to physically remind myself that I was good at what I do. And that was really critical for me to be able to get on stage and speak in front of 4,000 people.
We got the physical indicator or anchor, and then shifting gears from the negative to the positive talk. What's the next step?
Well, I want to remind folks that the affirmations must be really simple and bite-sized, right? Mine is, I got this, nobody outworks me, and I can learn anything. And, you asked me about research before. I want to turn your readers to a Lubomowski study from Harvard that talked about how 3 affirmations a day, if you're in the problem-solving world, increased your efficiency to solve that problem, something like 26%.
Okay.
And if you were in the sales marketing world, your revenue went up 30-some-odd% by using 3 affirmations a day. And that's what you tell yourself, you start to believe, and how it translated directly to the output of your work, your production, your ability to solve complex problems. And so that affirmation and that self-talk moves right into that next thing, which is reminding yourself of how good you are.
Oh, yes. Well, this affirmation stuff, that's juicy. I love a good study with some numbers behind it. So we had Hal Elrod, who talked about the 6 morning habits of high performers. He brought the Miracle Morning and such on the show earlier. And he gave some great distinctions associated with what makes an affirmation good versus delusional and problematic. So I'd love to hear your take. So from the research, what are some of the ingredients or do's and don'ts for a positive affirmation? Now, what I'm recalling, I think Hal used the example of money flows effortlessly to me, I'm a magnet for wealth is not so helpful because your brain goes, no, it doesn't. I've got to hustle and bend over backwards to make things happen. It's so, can you give us some pro tips on making those affirmations effective?
I think this is a great question. And one of the things I recognized early on is in order to have an affirmation be meaningful and have genuine belief, you have to have genuine control over it. And so that locus of control for an affirmation is really important and critical. Nobody outworks me. So I can control that. I can learn anything. I can control that too. Right? And so when you listen to those things, are they within your circle of influence? The magic for me as a sports psychologist is to always give agency to the people to control their affirmation. So it has to be something that you can master and you can own. From there, I talked about a letter to yourself. And I think this is really an important piece. We all will feel self-doubt, or it will creep into us when we get a promotion, when we get a new opportunity, or when somebody will criticize us or be really hard on us. And you have to be able to pull out a letter that you've written to yourself at good times. I remember when I became the director of athletics at Ryerson University. This is a university of 40,000 people. I came from Iowa, a university of 1,000 people. Oh my goodness, I'm in charge of millions of dollars. I have to manage people. And I remember that whole imposter syndrome kicking in. And I read this letter to myself. And my letter goes something like this. Dear Ivan, thanks for choosing the right person to marry. Nice job on accomplishing your PhD before you hit 40. You've launched a business with an amazing partner. All these things I wanted to brag to myself. It was my own personal brag sheet. To remind myself when I was going in the dumps and going this way, no. Let's remember all these things and all these challenges that you've had. And I pull it out, and I needed to read that day in, day out, day in, day out. Now, a lot of folks out there will say, well, a brag sheet, what like that's ego, man. And I want people to recognize this is not a letter to others. That is arrogance, right? This is a letter that you're writing to yourself. And so people's like, well, how do you define confidence over arrogance and ego? That's it. Confidence is what you tell yourself. Arrogance and ego is about what you're telling others about yourself. And so it's important to take this letter, look into yourself in the mirror, take your quiet spot, and engage in this personal reminder of all of the amazing things you've done.
You know, I really like that. You had it in a letter. I have it on my shelf. There is a Black Mead spiral notebook. I haven't looked at it lately, which might be good, or I don't know. I don't know if that's good or bad. I haven't needed it or felt the need.
That's it, Pete, right? When you get to that next phase, wherever your career or your life will take you, when you'll need it, you know where to get it. You found it.
That's true. It's so handy. And I think I borrowed this from maybe Tony Robbins, who talked about if you have a belief, I still see this diagram in my head. I read this when I was a teenager. It's like if you have a belief, you need to have some supporting legs, like a table, for your brain to be like, yeah, okay, that's true. And so I think this was in college. I was feeling kind of like a loser because, you know, in high school, I was just like, I was kind of the man, if you will, in terms of, I'm a valedictorian and homecoming king. And I was getting lots of praises and affirmations in all kinds of directions. And then in college, I was like rejected from the sketch comedy team and the business consulting group and the other business club. And then the other, and I was like, what is wrong? And so I was feeling pretty down about my capabilities. And then I just sort of thought, well, hey, maybe I'll just make a list of reasons why the belief that I'm capable of rocking and rolling is true. And it's like, holy smokes, this is a pretty long list. Okay, I guess I've just had a bad luck streak, and I'm gonna, keep trying. And sure enough, I found some clubs that would take me, and it was a good college career.
I love what you're saying, because you're doing what we call as self-confident people interpret feedback differently. And what you're able to do right now is, I guess I had a bad streak. After using some skills, instead of like, my God, I'm a loser, I'll never do any good. And then you start to dig yourself what we call lowering a snake's belly in a wagon rut, right? You interpreted those failures differently. That is so key. How we interpret setbacks really sets us apart.
The coronavirus is a hot topic everywhere on the news, etc. And I've been chatting with a few people who have, admitted to really experiencing a healthy dose of depression, anxiety, mental health challenges that, is not so typical for them under normal circumstances. But hey, not getting out, not seeing people, not being as easy to get to the gym, or all these sort of rituals, habits, routines, healthy, good things they got going on are disrupted, and they're now kind of reaping what they've had to. So, hey, help us here. If listeners are experiencing this right now, how might we apply some of these tools to help shorten the time in the funk?
Well, it's a great question again, right? And so one of the things you recognize is that we know that thoughts influence our beliefs, which influence our actions. And so when you're in a funky space, you know that you're thinking. And then it's influencing your beliefs and then how you get to the action part. And so one of the things that's really important is in this whole world that we're using the term social distancing. And the psychologist in me says, I don't know if that's the right term that we should be thinking about. I think the term should be physical distancing. And we should be engaging with the people that are important to us, who add value to us. A lot of times when I talk about building self-confidence, I talk about getting away from the people who will tear you down, which is the negative people, the people who are giving you negative feedback versus critical feedback. But I think the opposite is also true, which means get close to the people who will build you up. And so you know who you are and who those people are, and you can know and you can see what are the tells that are telling you you're going off and you're going into a place. And you need to pay attention to your physical tells that say you're getting to a point of stress. And then you need to put yourself in a place where you can connect with those people. And in today's world, it's going to have to be virtual. But with Zoom, with Microsoft Teams, with FaceTime, with Google Hangouts, there's a way to infuse yourself and your relationships with positivity to help build you up and to help pass you through these troubling times. When we say we're all in this together, nobody does it alone. And sometimes we're so proud and we're so afraid to share our vulnerabilities. That's not what confidence or high performance life is all about. It's about recognizing that we are in this together.
Okay, that's good. Now, you mentioned physical stress tells. Please flag them right up front. So some listeners might be like, that's been going on.
You think about it, right? We don't recognize that we need to always talk about stress. There's two types of stress. There's distress and there's eustress. Eustress is the positive pieces that raise our levels and help us perform better. And distress is the one that overwhelms us. How we react to that stress overwhelms us. I remember when I was first leading, a stressor for me that I was not ready, the skin on my hand started to peel. I started to get serious, bad cotton ball mouth. But there's also a point where I need to be at the right level of performance anxiety in order to get the best out of me. When the butterflies are in your stomach, when you're feeling your heart start to race, I know I'm ready. I'm at my peak game. Have you ever had a client or a guest on your show where you were like, man, I was on. I brought my A game to this guy, and thought about how you felt just before that moment?
Yes. Well, it was funny. Just before we spoke, I was feeling a little bit like, my energy level was sort of lower. And yeah, I was just sort of thinking, well, how would I prefer to feel? It's like, well, I'd like to be fascinated and powerful and curious. So yeah, I guess that's how I feel before a great interview.
Right? I think it's really important about how we connect with those around us, and not just the energy we give, but the energy we draw from those people.
Well, let's see. So in your book, you mentioned 5 skills, and it sounds like we've hit a few of them: positive thought, team building, grit, higher expectations, and focus. Are there any of these that you think we've covered too shallowly?
Well, I think the one that we haven't touched is this higher expectations one. And I think this is really key we talk about it from the Pygmalion effect, is what we call it in the world of leadership or sport, is people will rise to your minimum level of expectations. And I think this is really important for leaders that are out in the field, is about how do you lead people to be excellent and confident, and how can you influence them? And one of the ways is about catching them when they're good, because they'll raise to your minimum level of expectations. And what I mean by that is, we know that if you're critical, if you give negative feedback, hey, I need this presentation to look like this. Hey, this chart didn't have what I needed on it. Hey, I need you to do this, this, and this. That we know that we'll get the behavior we want. But typically it erodes the relationship. Typically it creates conflict. If we can instead forget about that, the negative things that people are doing, and instead focus on the team member that might be doing it right. Meaning, you're in a meeting, hey, Folks, thanks for coming on time to this meeting. It helps us get started. Or somebody presented a report. Hey, I love how this report was. Notice the font size is the way I want it. I love that the logo is here in the bottom left. Instead, what happens is you catch people when they're good. And what we've known and what we've seen in the research is that improvement exponentially improves over when we catch them when they're bad. In the world of psych, we call this the social learning theory, is that people learn through observation. If we can focus on the excellence, now what happens is instead of us tearing down a player over here who was really sour or bitter or angry because of our feedback, we've built up somebody else and they feel great and aligned to you and really increase their loyalty and their willingness to follow you. And we've said somebody else over here is like, oh, I better pay attention. I want that same feedback. And the whole organization rises. Mm-hmm. Can you catch them when they're good? Well, I think the last piece is just to remind people that this is a skill. The skill of self-confidence isn't about just sitting here and okay, I've tried it. I wrote this letter. I read it once. It didn't work. Oh, I said my affirmation today and it didn't happen. Well, I tried praise and it still hasn't happened. We have to be willing to persist, just like the mastery of any task in the workplace, and give it an opportunity to grab hold. Mm-hmm. And so for the listeners that are out there, be patient with yourselves and be patient with the people that you're leading, because good things will happen if you give it an opportunity to shine, and you will see a cultural shift in the people. And most importantly, or just as importantly, a cultural shift in yourself and how you approach leading.